Good evening. If you haven't signed in yet, please do. And if you're up socializing, it's about time to find a seat. We want to make sure we have enough seats for everybody. We'll be starting here in a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Millar. I'm the director of the Missoula City County Office of Planning and Grants. And before we introduce the consultant and get started with the ubiquitous PowerPoint presentation, I wanted to do a little polling of my own and then try to put this in context of some of the other plans that we've got going on. So this will be a little less sophisticated than the polling machines that they've got here. But how many of you in the audience use the land in some form or fashion? If you'd raise your hand if you happen to use the land. Okay, how many of you use the transportation system? How many of you think there's a connection between those two? How many people in the audience either own or have access to an automobile? Okay, there's a vast auto owners conspiracy in the room tonight, obviously. How many of us own bicycles? I think I saw more cars, but yeah, there are people that own bikes in town too. How many people work for a living? The business community is represented. How many of you just party till the next trust fund check shows up? How many folks live in the city? How many folks live in unincorporated Missoula County? Okay. How many folks live somewhere else on the planet? Other planets? Okay, great. Our region is growing. I wanted to respond to some of the stuff that we've heard through the process and kind of put this in context. Our region is growing. You were asked at the last workshop to envision a Missoula with twice the population that we have today. And a lot of people thought that was an awfully large assumption to make, as that could not happen sustainably. That whether it's water or land or air or something, that kind of development is not sustainable. I would suggest to you that we as humans have shown the capacity to build in unsustainable ways all over the planet. And the example of Bend, Oregon, or Portland, Oregon, or Las Vegas, Nevada, or other places, what we're seeing in the demographics that are coming out is that we're growing as a community by about 750 new homes a year. And that 750 new homes a year will result in 15,000 new homes over the next 20 years and 30,000 new homes, which would be roughly doubling our population in the next 40 some odd years. Now, who among us knows what's going to happen in that period of time that might affect that? But I think it would be irresponsible for us not to do planning with the notion that there are going to be other people here. I know of two ways to stop growth. One is to make it so unpleasant that nobody wants to live in the location, and the other is the way that Joseph Stalin used of handing everybody an ID card and forcing them to live in different places. We don't do that in the United States, and we certainly don't do it in Missoula. So our region is growing. We're not going to talk a lot about that, but if you're interested in the growth patterns and why, I'd encourage you to check out the website of the Center for the Rocky Mountain West. The leadership there, Dr. Swanson, has done a really interesting job showing how Montana is growing, and the part of Montana that's growing is the western third, and the city in the western third that's growing is Missoula. We, in the next year or so, our 5-county market is going to overtake Billings and its 10-county market as the largest market in Montana. We won't be the largest city, but it'll be the largest market area. So growth is happening. The other thing I wanted to point out is that while $200 million seems like an awful lot of money over a 20-year period, we really don't have any money for transportation improvements, or relatively tiny amount. I was at a conference in DC last week. Houston has $187 billion for transportation over the next 20 years. Our $200 million is not going to go very far with the impacts of cost escalation and state overhead on our projects and things like that. And people are saying, well, why plan? We don't have any money to build anything. When you don't have money is the time you need to plan. When you've got lots of money and you can build everybody's projects like we used to do in the 60s and 70s, planning wasn't as important, and we are living with the results of that. Now is the time to plan, because the investments we make are going to be very, very important to the kind of community that we have going into the future. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Envision Missoula process. There are some who have said that the charretting and the sitting around the tables with the tape and stuff like that is pie in the sky, is what I saw in one email that was distributed to a lot of people in the business community, actually encouraging them to come here tonight and make sure we were doing this right. I wanted to point out for everybody's benefit that this long-range transportation plan process that we're doing, one, it's a federal requirement that our metropolitan planning organization update the transportation plan. And two, the process that we're using, the Envision Missoula process, is a process, if you go to the Federal Highway Administration's website. The Federal Highway Administration is an agency of the federal government under the leadership of President George Bush and Secretary of Transportation Peters from the state of Arizona. And on the Federal Highway Administration's website, the Envision Missoula process, the process we're using, is held up as the model for the state of the practice in transportation planning in the United States. This is the way that the federal government recommends that we do this work. The team that we have working for us has won national awards doing these kinds of projects in these kinds of environments. So this is a serious process. This is a very successful process. It links land use and transportation, which is the way we ought to be doing things. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about the other work we're doing and how this links into it. This is a very high-level overview of land use in our community, and we're going to be looking at, and what we've been looking at is, where do you as a community want the growth and the transportation to go? The team is also looking at where the traffic is now, and this project is all about what are the consequences, the transportation consequences of what you want to see your community look like in the future. What are some options, what are the consequences, and how do we build from that information to identify the projects that need to be built? We're doing another project called the Urban Fringe Development Area Plan, or UFTA for short. UFTA is a Norwegian word. Somebody told me it was a swear word, so I had to look it up on the computer. And the definition that I liked the most was, I am overwhelmed. So, if you look at our Urban Fringe, UFTA fits just right. What we're doing there is we're looking a little closer to the ground, and we're looking in a 20-year time frame instead of this long-range visioning that you guys have been doing. And we're looking at what are the constraints to development in terms of open space and steep slopes and floodplains and infrastructure and the like. So we're going to be taking the desires, the wants that come out of this process and looking at them with the overlay of the constraints that are in the UFTA process. We're also working on a zoning and subdivision rewrite for the city, and that is how we're going to implement the future we want. Code is not planning. Zoning and subdivision code is not planning. Zoning and subdivision code is how you implement the plans. And we're working on the rewrite at the same time so that we can put the code in place to make it easy to do the things that the community wants to have happen and difficult to do the things the community doesn't want to have happen. We're also doing a master plan for our downtown. The Greater Downtown Master Plan project was kicked off last month. The first week in March, there'll be a consultant team in town, and they'll be doing a big workshop on the downtown. This project and the UFTA project and the code project and the downtown project, they're all linked. They're all using the same data, the same information, and they're all guided by the same decision makers. The city council, of the city of Missoula, the mayor of the city of Missoula, and when we're out in the unincorporated county, the Board of County Commissioners. So there's a lot of work going on. The processes that we're using are state of the practice. The team has put an incredible amount of energy into putting this together for you. And I'm going to turn it over to them. But before I do, I wanted to close with a great quote that somebody sent me recently by a guy named Greg Paul. He's an author and an environmentalist. And he said, "We have the freedom to make informed, humane, and intelligent choices about the kind of world we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren. We also have the freedom to make uninformed, selfish, and stupid choices. Which will it be?" So with that happy thought, I'm going to turn it over to Ted Knowlton, and everybody have a good evening.
I'm going to do my best Phil Donahue impression. Thanks so much, Roger. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure to be here tonight with you to talk about the future of Missoula. I really think of Missoula as one of the great cities in the country. It's really a place that I think is quite wonderful. I promise I don't tell anybody that when I leave Montana. I keep that to myself. Now, I'm going to there we go. Here are some of the basic things that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to talk about, Roger did a great job, talk about the process that Envision Missoula has gone through, and share with you results of last November's workshops. Just by a quick raise of hands, how many of you had an opportunity to attend those workshops back in November? A lot of you, great. And how many of you did not have an opportunity to attend those? And so your opinions matter just as much as those who attended the workshops. We're going to talk about those results, show you these scenarios that came out of that process, but everybody's opinion tonight matters. Review the scenarios and ask you what ideas you think have merit in those scenarios. So this is an important process, as Roger talked about. It's the place where tomorrow's roads, transit lines, and trails are born. And it really, although it's not a lot of money relative to the need that is out there, nor relative to other regions, it's a lot of money. I mean, millions of dollars, I could buy a lot of tacos with that. So it does matter. But Roger talked about how modest that is, and part of the reason I think that you look at land use is if you have mounting transportation needs and challenges, but you don't have the money to solve all of them through construction, you've got to be creative. You've got to look at how can we live in such a way that we're reducing our demands for transportation. And another thing to think about relative to improvements to transportation is without a look at land use, sometimes the improvements that you make can be difficult to sustain. So let's say that there's an improvement that reduces congestion, and some people then decide, well, I can commute at 8:30 again. I don't have to avoid congestion. I can leave when I really want to. Or I can take the route that I really prefer once again now that there's an improvement. And over time, some might say, well, there's a new transportation improvement of one sort or another. Maybe I'll take that job that's across town. It's a little bit further away from where I live. Or maybe I'll actually go live further out where land is cheaper. And so when all those things converge, sometimes it leads to a result where you've lost what you thought you've gained. So all of this, once again, it suggests to us, hey, let's take a look at the land use patterns and see how they can help us stay mobile. And that's what this process is doing. It's looking at how those two things together shape our future and what are the ideas we like from scenarios that we want to take with us. So scenarios, it's really important to understand that these are not competing master plans for the county. We're not saying, should we pick future A, future B, and future C, and then implement it through plans immediately. You can think of these as crash test dummies. And I know I have this little ringing. It's not just in my head, right? You can hear a little bit of ringing while I talk. I apologize for that. It's out of my control. Anyhow, so we take these scenarios, we project them out into the future. We've picked basically a population at random, and it is double what we are at today. So the county is at about 100,000, and these scenarios are going out to 200,000. And it's not to say that's where we should grow to, or that's what we're predicting, but it's a test. It's a test. Can we spend our virtual transportation dollars? Can we grow in such a way that we like the outcome if we project a doubling of the population? And it is the basic notion that if we can figure out those strategies that make Missoula livable at 200,000, they're going to make sense for us as we grow 5 and 10 and 20,000. They'll make sense regardless of how much we grow. Here's an overview of what happened. So we had the workshops in November 13th to 15th. They've been turned into alternative scenarios, which we're going to talk about tonight. Get your reaction, and then your reaction will be turned into a vision scenario and transportation planning principles in March. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And then the transportation plan needs to start to put some constraints on this. How much money do we really think we have? What is the planning horizon for the transportation plan? And how does all of this fit together with the values that you express through the Envision Missoula process? The ideas that you think have merit. So, keypad polling. Oops. Oopsie. Okay, keypad polling. Does everybody have one of these little remote controls? If you don't have one, you can go over to the red table and they can help you with these. Now, if you go within, outside of 100 yards of that transponder, these will explode and cause tremendous bodily harm to you. So please, no matter what you do, please do not take these outside of these rooms. They won't work your remote control, your TV at home. They basically have no purpose whatsoever unless you have the amazingly expensive software and hardware that goes with it. So please leave those with us, much appreciated. Now you don't need to do anything with these to get them started. You just press the option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, corresponding with what you see up on the screen. If you don't like your response, you can change it. It just takes your last response. Takes your last response. Everything you do with this is anonymous. We don't know who did what. So we want you to be honest. And I know you will. And with that statement of honesty, we really want to find out what type of people are here tonight. So the question is, have you ever lied to your mother? Never. Only once. I paid dearly for it, only a couple of times. Yes, but there was candy involved. That's a good excuse right there. It's a good reason. I prefer to call it a stretching of the truth, only when it was in her best interest. Yes, but my brother or sister made me do it, and too many times to count. Now, one of the things that you'll see up in this corner is I can tell how many people have responded. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I don't know how many of you can see that, but I can see how fast they're coming in. So go ahead and respond now if you haven't already. Yes, question? No, you can respond as many times as you want, but it only records your last response, okay? So you can't stuff the ballot box. It doesn't let you do that. How many people do we have here? Ballpark 100. So we've got about 20 of you that really are just not sure how you treated your mother when you were little. Go ahead and get your responses in now. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So I'll say that. I'm going to close the poll, and then that gives you about 10, 20 seconds, and then your chance is gone. Let's find out what happened. All right. Pretty interesting. Lots of you prefer to call it a stretching of the truth. I see how it goes. Lots of you, too many times to count. So, interesting group. Okay, so now we're going to learn a little bit about who's here tonight. Now remember, it's anonymous. How old are you? Go ahead and log in your results now. Okay, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. There should be no changing of the mind here. Okay, 91, 92. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Are you ready? Okay. So a pretty good distribution. Not a lot of great youngsters. The youngest ones in the crowds, they don't have access to the keypads. I think we saw some very small children. So wisely don't have the keypads that they could dunk into their drink. Okay. Where do you live? The closest community, if you live within Missoula County. If you don't live in Missoula County, go ahead and pick 10. 10 is the zero. It's the zero. It's the bottom middle button, okay? The closest community. We know we didn't name every community in the county. Well, pick the closest community. This was our best attempt at it. We know we didn't name every piece of the county. Let's see if we can get a few more in. I'm going to close the poll in 10 more seconds. We've got 90 responses. 92. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Get your vote in. Okay. Downtown University, South Hills, lots of Central Midtown folks. Most of you are from the county. How long have you lived in Missoula County? Okay, just a couple more. I'm going to close the poll in a few seconds. Okay, get your vote in. I wish I could figure out how to get rid of that ringing. All right, 93. Okay, here we go. Between 1 and 5 years. A lot of newcomers and a lot of people who have been here a longer amount of time. How many trips, we're learning about you. How many trips do you typically make through walking, bicycling, or public transportation? So you can read those options at least once a day, more than once a week, a few times a month, once a month, rarely or never. Okay, we're at 94 responses. I'm going to close the poll. Get your vote in if you need to. Okay, here I go. I'm closing the poll. Okay, well that's really impressive. 47% of you take one of those modes at least once a day, quite frequently. Okay, 22%. A lot of people though also rarely or never. So that's great. We have a pretty good balance there. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what happened in those November workshops. We asked people to do something that's kind of fun and sometimes uncomfortable. That is, get together with 7 other strangers and talk about the future of Missoula. Think about new transportation facilities. How would you have Missoula change? Now remember, this was an exercise. This wasn't saying, do you want to grow by 100,000? But if we were to grow by 100,000, how would you want it to have? How would you want it to happen? And where would you not want growth to happen at all? Okay, and people had a base map that shows the county as it is today, just showing existing land uses, markers that they could delineate things like where do you want to have growth not happen or some other things. Transportation tape that represented roads, transit, bicycle facilities, and a variety of things. And chips that represented different types of places that could grow in the county or change. over time. And it was a very lively, exciting process. It was, I think you could really feel an energy in the room at the time. People working in groups. They appear to be coordinated. There's a little bit of a synchronization there. Something interesting in that particular spot of the county. Sometimes disagreement. Hold on there, cowboy. And then at the conclusion of the process, each group had an opportunity to say, look, here are some of the key ideas we think make sense for transportation, and as we think about how land use plays a role in transportation over time, the places we want to create. We had 280 people show up. Really a wonderful turnout. And frankly, the civic spirit in Missoula is tremendous, and it's a delight. Out of that came 35 maps, 35 of these handcrafted group efforts to explore the future of the county. And that's what they were. They were an exploration, a brainstorming, if you will. Here are some of the key themes that we saw come out of this. If there were 35 maps, as there were 35 maps, a full 34 of them focused more on public transportation than on roadway improvements, which is really unusual. 26 maps showed extensive high-capacity transit linking all corners of the study area. They focused on reaching out to Bonner and Frenchtown and Lolo. 20 maps focused on multimodal improvements to existing roadways in town, in central Missoula. So there were a few different things happening there. Here's a very typical map that shows you what happened. Generally, as you see this blue tape, that was public transportation. The yellow, I believe, was, as my memory serves me, bicycle routes. You can see a typical map there. Here are some examples of that second theme, high-capacity transportation linking the corners of the county. Let me show you a few examples of this. Okay, can you see the blue tape reaching out to Frenchtown and Lolo? Focusing on multimodal improvements in town. If you look in the central part of Missoula, and the focus on roadway improvements, trail improvements on this map. You can see a detail here of a pretty extensive transit system in the central part with a lot of bike improvements here, and another version of that. So that was a pretty common theme as well. Other key things that happened, a lot of people showing multimodal improvements. When I say multimodal, that's something that identifies me as a geek anytime I use that word multimodal. But what that means is it means bicycle, transit, roadways, walking. Those are all modes of getting around. So multimodal, that's what that's referring to. Improvements on Russell and Reserve Street, 20 maps of the 35. Okay, so here's a question. Now, you're going to get a chance to vote on this twice. You'll get to pick your first choice, then I'll bring up a new screen, and you can vote on your second choice. Okay? So, as you look at this, hopefully you can read that. What features are most desirable to you when thinking about public transportation? And this in light of how much people explored public transportation in those workshops. So when you think about what's desirable for you for public transportation, what's your first choice? You can read those up there. Low capital expenses. You can log in your votes now. Low out-of-pocket expense, a short wait time with frequent service. Low emissions per trip. High speed of service, more reliable travel time. Adds in the ability to bypass congestion. So we're looking for the magic number, I think, of 94 responses. Have we beaten 94 yet? Anybody? Okay. We're at 90, so please get your vote in. Remember, you can vote again for your second choice. Okay, 94, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Okay, short wait time, frequent service, quite important to you. Less emissions per trip, more reliable travel time, also important. What features are most important to you when thinking about public transportation? Now pick your second choice. Pick something else besides what you picked last time. $76. $85. Okay. All right, get your votes in. I'm going to close the poll. Okay, let's see what we did here. Okay, so people that didn't pick it before picked short wait time, frequent service, but we see 6 and 4 also strengthening, low out-of-pocket expense growing more in this result. Okay, now I want you to get out your credit card and log in your credit card number for me. I promise it's anonymous. Okay, other common transportation ideas. This is misplaced a little bit, but crossing of the Bitterroot, a lot of people showed that. When I show you that number, 19 of 35 maps, including streets, transit, and trails. So land use themes. Now, when you see each one of these little bars, that represents one of those 35 tables. This is showing you, as people put those chips down that represent different places, and we counted up how many of the houses in those places were single family versus a townhouse type of density versus a multi-unit type of density. This is what we found. So that middle density category, about a townhouse level, was extremely popular. And one of the other things that you note about this is different than what has been happening lately in this county. So you explored a different density mix, a different mix of housing than what we're seeing lately. Relative to commercial places, once again, each one of these bars represents one of those 35 maps. And here what you're seeing is, as people put their employment down, they had the chance to put into things like a commercial center or an office park. They also had the chance to put it into a town center or an urban core, I believe was one of the chips. So some of the chips were single use, employment by itself, and others were with a mix of other uses, maybe residential or what have you. And so here what you're seeing is purple is the mixed use prevalence and red is the single use prevalence. So kind of a real difference of opinion, but generally, if you look at the middle bar, that gives you a sense about 50% of the time people explored employment in a mixed use setting. Land use open space, very popular for people to explore different open space ideas. Steep slopes, 2/3 of the groups, riparian areas and wetlands, agricultural preservation as well. So we took these themes, we quantified your results, we tried to develop these scenarios so they were true to those themes. They were also true to the numeric quantified results that you gave. So as you look at these scenarios, know that we took our marching orders from you. And a few things to note. We tried to control for things like population employment. We definitely did not let these be constrained. We're visioning, we're exploring ideas with these. But they differed importantly relative to the transportation ideas explored and the development patterns. And the point of all of this, again, crash test dummies, is to explore the consequences of those different ideas. What does this mean for quality of life? What do we learn from it that we can use? So here's the overview of these scenarios. Business as usual is our control. It is to say, look, if we don't do any changes, what is the path that we're on? Where are we headed today? And then we can use that to see how much we like or dislike these other two scenarios that grew out of the workshop. So scenario A, business as usual, emphasis on roadway expansion. Based on current plans, employment continues to grow in central Missoula as well. Extends today's housing trends into the future. So you can think about development subdivisions that you've seen happen recently. Just think about more of that into the future. Scenario B, satellite town centers, 4 distinct multimodal corridors. Again, You remember what multimodal means. It had the most investment in public transportation. It was the most distributed. Remember one of those themes of reaching out with public transportation to Bonner and Frenchtown and Lolo? That's what scenario B tries to do. And it matches that transportation strategy with satellite commercial and mixed-use centers that are coordinated with those transit investments. Now, scenario C, Focus Inward, creates a downtown mobility district, a fancy way of saying, let's go through the central part of downtown of Missoula, and let's take a look and see how we can make life better for every mode. Balancing all of the modes, but focusing on making a walkable place. It has the most pedestrian and bicycle focus of the three scenarios. It emphasizes compact, contiguous growth, and it explores the concept of intensifying in downtown on low-value commercial sites, redevelopment. So let's dig into these in a little bit more detail. Now, we talked about this a little bit, but this is not to say that scenario A has no emphasis on walking and biking, but of the three, it had less emphasis than the other two. Does that make sense? Scenario C had the most emphasis on walk and bike. Scenario B, the satellite town centers, had the most emphasis on public transportation. And scenario A had the most emphasis on major roadways. All three of the scenarios do affect all of the modes of transportation. Here's a sense of what this means in terms of land patterns. What you see with the colored areas are new development, newly developed areas in these concepts. Here is business as usual. Here is satellite town centers and Focus Inward. So you can see, even in Focus Inward, it's not all right in the heart of town, but it does have a focus that way. I'm going to scan through those really fast. Satellite town centers, again, once again, you can see the focus on these town center areas and the business as usual, if you can get a sense of those, okay? Here's scenario A, the business as usual. This is something you're familiar with. Emphasis on roadway expansion, employment continues to grow in central Missoula, extends housing trends. You can see the variety of roadway improvements that are explored here. And if you didn't have an opportunity to look at them, these posters give you a better sense of the detail behind these scenarios. Pictures of things that are familiar to you. They're carried forward in this scenario. Housing, commercial, retail. Okay, scenario B, satellite town centers. You can see them popping up here. Frenchtown, Y, Bonner, Lolo. 4 distinct multimodal corridors reaching out to those town centers. The most investment in transit, the most geographically distributed, employment growth happens in accessible mixed-use town centers. So you can think of the transit, it could take many different forms reaching out to these town centers, but one way to think of it is that it's a fixed route public transportation system. That could be a bus. Here is an example. This is from the city of Lost Wages in southern Nevada. They have a branded bus line that it's a fixed route with high quality stations, and people take advantage of that. The Queen of Hearts. I've heard that's lucky. Hopefully you do better when you get off that. Don't take my word for it next time you're down there. It could take a higher form like, this is called bus rapid transit, and on the high end, it can be like light rail on rubber tires. Here you see an example of a system that's in Eugene, another college town, where it runs on a fixed guideway. It doesn't compete, in this part of town, it doesn't compete with traffic. You buy your pass beforehand and board when it comes. And once again, town centers coordinated with those transit and new major streets. Multimodal corridors, once again. Town centers that feature a mix of uses. This is very different than a pattern of uniform density, where you don't see focal points in the urban fabric. And part of the strategy of this scenario is to say, can these town centers make a difference in terms of how transportation behavior, in terms of transportation behavior. And it's very different than what we might see in a conventional development, where you can see in both of these slides you have a mix of uses. But in the town center concept, they're oriented to the corners of the block, so it's nicer to walk in. You can see this little dashed line is a walk distance. And if you're leaving this store here, what you might have to cross to visit another destination. And if you leave this business here, the environment that you might experience here. So it is carrying something forward that we've seen historically, traditionally, throughout America, but we've not been doing as much of it lately. Here are some examples. It can take so many different forms of architecture. Sometimes I think people focus on, well, this needs to be traditional architecture, but it certainly does not. Here are some examples that you see. I guess I don't need to light fixture those. Some very interesting things being explored across the country relative to town centers. Streets in town centers tend to have a connected pattern like this. You can think of this development being at the intersection of a more major arterial and maybe a minor collector. Scenario C, focus inward. Downtown multimodal enhancement district. Do you like that better than mobility district? I don't know. They both need real work, don't they? We need the best marketing minds Missoula can offer. The most pedestrian and bicycle focused scenario, compact growth occurs contiguously. You can read this all. Downtown intensifies by building on parking lots and low value commercial sites. When you look at this little diagram, this blue crosshatched area is that enhancement district. You can get a better sense, once again, by looking at the poster afterward. So you might see a variety of things in this mobility district. Perhaps electric shuttles. Streetscape improvements, focusing on how do you make it a more enjoyable walking experience. Pedestrian improvements, bicycle improvements, crosswalks, ways to get past busy roads, perhaps. Redevelop parking and low-value commercial buildings. Redevelopment is a tool that cities can use to change things they don't like. And you all can think to yourself, are there things that I would like to have changed in the built-up area of central Missoula? If the answer is yes, it's hard to do that without private money. Private developers going in and rebuilding on a site. Here's an example from Denver. Certainly things that a lot of people, maybe not everybody, would say, you know, we could probably do better than that. Parking lot, low intensity sites. This is what we're talking about. And how that might change over time to create a place that feels very different. Now, why are we looking at these things in a transportation vision? Let's get into that in a second after a few more pictures. Examples of what this could look like in Missoula. Once again, the architecture can take any form that you might think of. Do I have any what?
Winter pictures.
No, I don't have any winter pictures. You like winter, do you?
Just here. Real problem for planning.
Okay, so how the scenarios compare. Let's look at how these all relate to each other as we project the future and see how they do. Traveling distances. You can see on a lot of these where we're at in 2007, and you'll notice how the transportation challenges look like they're really going to mount. It's going to get harder in general to travel long distances in Missoula, pretty much no matter what we do as we grow. Sorry for that. Death, taxes, congestion. Okay, travel distances. Business as usual, satellite town centers focus inward. You can see a real advantage on travel distances for focus inward. Think about the strategies that it explores as a concept as you see these results. Time spent traveling. That's a function of congestion and distance, right? You can see once again, focus inward doing quite well on that. All three of them quite a bit higher than where we're at today. Congested streets, okay. Greenhouse gas emissions. This was projected as a function of driving distances. That's tons of carbon dioxide per day. Okay, so now dust off your keypads again. And we want to get your thoughts on some things. To help people get around in the region, which of the following do you feel would be the most effective? The most effective. You can think about the scenarios and how they performed. You can think about what you care about. Add new major roads. You can log in your responses anytime. Add capacity to existing roads. Add a high capacity fixed transit route. Increase the frequency of the bus system. Create more pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Three is public transportation. 5 is not. 3 is public transportation. 5 is not. This is in general to help people get around. In general. Okay, we have one holdout. There we go. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Oh, 95. Man, that's a good feeling. Next time, let's see if we can go for 96. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to close the poll. Okay. Add new major roads. Add capacity to existing roads. Add a high capacity fixed transit route. So lots of different ideas out there. One of the things that is interesting about the satellite town centers is that there are differences to the built environment that are small in scale and tend to affect travel behavior that can also be taken into consideration. They're not part of the numbers that we're showing you tonight, and that's why we thought we'd show them to you. Here's an example of a typical commercial strip center. And if you take that same amount of employment and you mix it with a few other uses like this, with a different street pattern and a different basic level of walkability, there are tangible proven differences to travel behavior. Once again, these are not part of the numbers we're showing you tonight. Here is one more example, an office park, same number of employees, a mixed-use office center. Now here are the nicknames for the measurable transportation benefits that you see from the second of those two pairs. The nickname that it's given is the 5 Ds of land use efficiency, and they're pretty intuitive. As densities increase in an area, you tend to see driving distances drop. As diversity referring to a mix of homes and jobs, again, driving distances tend to decrease. Design connected streets, existence of good sidewalks, strategic bike enhancements, destinations growing in areas that are accessible to where people already go to work, transitable access, transit, distance to transit. Again, pretty intuitive that these would have an impact. When you take all of these 5 Ds that are incorporated into this town center concept that these scenarios explore in some level, it is possible to have a pretty noticeable difference in travel behavior. A reduction in how far people need to travel. And we thought it would be useful to present those research findings to you. So, with everything that's come before, talking about those mixed-use centers that brief notion of the 5 Ds of land use efficiency, here's a question for you. With an increasing population, how much growth should be focused in new mixed-use centers in the region? The question is downtown a mixed-use center? What do you think? Does it exhibit a mix of uses?
Yes, you're not saying where,
Right. This is not a where question, but downtown is a mixed-use center. It exhibits a mix of uses. It's in the center, and it exhibits those characteristics of the 5 Ds that we talked about a minute ago. Pardon me. Yes, go ahead. Well, you all know your county better than I do. I believe that there are some others that are growing, and Roger, if you want to mention a couple, but it's not alone in Missoula.
There are some places that are kind of, I guess, embryonic. If you look down around the Midtown, around the mall, where you're starting to see housing and shopping and employment together. And actually, if you go out to North Reserve Street and look like at Hellgate Meadows, you know, there are things that are happening around town.
Thanks. Okay, so we're at 94. We're at the 95 mark. I don't know if there actually is a 96th keypad puller out there somewhere who's just waiting for their moment in the sun. But we're going to go ahead and close the poll. Oh, we got the 96th in, and I'm going to go back because I didn't mean to not show you what happened there. I'm so sorry. So 63%, pretty strong majority of you. Center should include a majority of the region's growth. Okay. 96, our new record. Here are some of the differences between the scenarios in how much new developed land there are. Now, we're not saying, nor have we ever said, that these are highly probable, highly plausible scenarios. Remember, they're concepts, but you can see a pretty dramatic difference in terms of new developed land as a function of these 3 scenarios. Why is that? What enables focus inward to not have a lot of newly developed land? Here are some pictures of that. Okay, the browns are the extent of development. This is focusing on new development. Did you see that? This one is, once again, is business as usual. Satellite town centers, focus inward. There's a clear relationship, there appears to be a clear relationship between the scenarios, the extent of development, and some of the things that we looked at before. How congested are the streets? Okay, so one of the questions is, as you looked at those scenarios, you've thought about maybe some of the strategies they're exploring. The question is, hopefully you can read it, with which of the following growth patterns do you most agree? Allow growth as we do today, grow outward but only to adjoining areas, allow some growth outward but encourage inward growth, or encourage inward growth and actually make it more difficult or expensive to grow outward. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in a few seconds. Let's see if we can get that 96th in. I'm lowering my hand very slowly, meaning I will press the button in just a that was good. Okay, 58% encourage inward growth, 2% allow growth as we do today, 5% grow outward but to adjoining areas. Okay, interesting. What should be the emphasis of new transportation investments? This is related. Access new geographic areas or expand modal options on existing infrastructure. There's that word again, modal. Preserve existing infrastructure. Take care of what we have. Widen existing roads. Modernize existing infrastructure. Tried to give you some examples there. Improve signals, make improvements at intersections, improvements at crosswalks, crossings for bicycles, a variety of things like that. Okay? Question? Typically that would mean add a lane. Okay, 89. I'm getting ready to raise my hand. And we're at the 96. I'm going to go ahead and close the 97. Wow. Maybe some late arrivals. Expand modal options on existing infrastructure. Strongest. Second, modernize existing infrastructure. Okay, Missoula housing prices. This is something you already know. Growing pretty dramatically. I think that's 160 in 03. Up over 200. So it's growing over time, certainly beating inflation. And my guess is a lot of you are feeling this. Now, one basic approach it's a simple approach, and it doesn't always work, but one basic approach is to look at what types of housing products are naturally more affordable, simply because they're smaller, maybe they take up space, maybe they don't have a lot of land associated with them. There's a clear difference between these concepts. Business as usual, about 40% in single family. Satellite town centers, about 25% in single family. Focus inward, a little bit less. This is all future housing. This is not the eventual state under these concepts. This is housing that would grow in the future. Okay, so as you think about housing, there's a relationship between that and some of the other things we've seen. Land, the growth of the land area as well. As you think about the growth anticipated in the next few decades, which housing mix do you think should be encouraged? About the same mix of housing as today, similar to business as usual. Allow a greater percentage of attached homes or multi-unit homes. Allow a much greater percentage of attached homes or multi-unit homes. Typically, you don't see any housing products built unless there's some housing market for them. So that's why there's that key word of allow. Okay, so we're looking for the magic number of 97. 94. Do I hear 94? Okay, I'm going to get ready to close the polls. I didn't want to do this. You're making me do it. 95. I've almost lowered my hand. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. Okay. 69% allow a much greater percentage of attached homes or multi-unit homes. 24% at 6. Transit-oriented development. Generally meaning it's near transit, but it also is trying to say we think people might try to get to transit from this development. It could be an office building, could be condos, could be townhouses. Transit-oriented development is very different between the three scenarios. This is just looking at the new transportation improvements. If we considered the existing transportation improvements, we wouldn't see as dramatic a difference between these scenarios, but there would still be a difference. Which of the following combinations do you most agree with? Development and transit, combining the two together. Option 1, grow employment and housing as we do today to support moderate transit expansion. Provide incentives to encourage workforce housing within walking distance of transit. Now these are additive 2, 3, and 4. If you pick 3, you're saying, in addition to 2, I also want to do this. And if you pick 4, you're saying, in addition to this and this, I want to add to it this. Does that make sense? So read this over. Once again, if you change your mind, you can always pick something different. So 2, once again, is provide incentives to encourage workforce housing within walking distance. 3 adds to that, provide incentives to encourage more office employment near transit. And 4 adds to that, discourage office employment from locating away from public transportation. We may have had a couple of people that needed to run for whatever reason. I'm not sure what our magic number is now, but we're still looking for about 95. 96, 97. Okay, I'm going to get ready to close the poll. 98, great. Okay, let's see what the results are. I don't know if Gabe can inform us of what that actually is, but just hit play one more time, please. Okay, hit escape, please. Talk amongst yourselves. Where is that question? Just find that question and hit play. Just hit play, don't worry about it. Yeah, just hit that. Okay, that is, let's do some basic math here. That looks like maybe about, let's call it 75%. We'll certainly know the exact number, apologize for that. But a lot of you looking at that high standard for transit-oriented development. Let's move on. Balance of investments. Relative to current spending, should we spend more money on public transportation, even if it means less money for roadways? Spend more money on roadways, even if it means less money for public transportation. Transportation dollars should be spent similar to what seems to be happening today. This is what you perceive to be happening. $65. And get your votes in, please. $94. So I'm going to close the poll in 10 more seconds. 95. I don't have a name for this maneuver, but you know what it means. It's kind of like Times Square. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Okay, spend more money on public transportation even if it means less money for roadways. Certainly not unanimous, but a strong majority. Okay, so the next question is about that notion of redevelopment. Redevelop parking, low-value commercial buildings. What should be the approach to that? As you think about redevelopment on underutilized sites, which statement do you most support? Which one comes closest to your opinion on this? Once again, this adds to this, 3 adds to 2, 4 adds to 3 and 2. Make sense? So go ahead and read those through carefully. Once again, you can change your mind. I don't support incentives to encourage redevelopment. I support incentives to build on vacant lots in existing neighborhoods. I support rebuilding on blighted commercial sites. I support rebuilding underutilized commercial sites. So this concept is broader than just blighted commercial sites. Blight means it's quite run down, generally, in layman's speak. Okay, 90. Get your votes in. Okay, let's get a few more in if we can. Okay, I'm going to raise my hand and close it in about 6 seconds. 3, 2, 1. I'm closing the poll. Okay. In addition to 2 and 3, I support rebuilding underutilized commercial sites. Okay, the future of downtown. As you think about redevelopment, or you think about growth in general in the downtown, what do you think? As you think about the scenarios and what they've meant to you, what they've said about the future. Few changes are made to downtown. Downtown fills in gaps with more buildings. Gaps might be a parking lot that faces the street. Expand the area of the central business district. Downtown expands both upwards and outwards. They're intended to be synonymous in this.
Does number 4 also include filling gaps?
Yes. Right, yes. They're intended to be increasing in their aggressiveness. I think next time I do this, I'm going to have some music that plays while people fill it out. If you have some suggestions, you can come up to me afterward and we'll talk. 93. Definitely not Jeopardy, way overused. Got to go with something different. Something transportation oriented. Yellow taxi, maybe, I'm not sure. Okay, we're at 95 results. 96. Okay. I'm going to get ready to close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a bit of a difference of opinion there. Strong majority on number 4. A pretty strong minority saying, let's fill in the gaps with more buildings. Okay. Road networks, there's a couple of basic approaches. These are simplified concepts, but as we look at new roadways that could be built in Missoula, we could think about, well, let's build a few roads and build them pretty wide, or we could build more roads but make them smaller and more narrow. It tends to be the case that the latter has more ability to move cars. Part of the reason is that as you add more lanes, the new lanes don't have the ability to move as many vehicles because of turning movements, but there's the ability to get through intersections and make turns more easily in general with this approach. So there are transportation benefits that have been found generally with that approach, but we wanted to get your opinion about how it fits with the places that you want to create, and as you think about traveling on these different systems, what makes sense to you? Major street networks, which general approach do you favor? A few large streets, many small streets, just not sure. I'm having trouble coming up with big yellow taxi in my mind. Okay, 91. 95. So I'm going to get ready to close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Get your vote in if you can. Okay, closing the poll. Few large streets, many small streets. A lot of you, I'm not really sure which I like the best. Local transportation networks is not something that is going to be an outcome of this plan, but it has a big relationship to transportation efficiency. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe more of a cul-de-sac pattern of streets versus an interconnected pattern of streets. On this cul-de-sac pattern, you tend to have longer walking distances. When you have turning movements on and off of a busy road like an arterial, you reduce its ability to move cars. You can think about what the land uses along this type of roadway would look like. So there are things to take into consideration. With an interconnected pattern, you tend to be able to make a pedestrian walk more as the crow flies. You take some trips off of a busier road, leaving them for people who are traveling to other places. And you're reducing a concentration of traffic. So you can think about what that means for land uses, walking, and for traffic efficiency. One of the things people think about is, well, I don't want cut-through traffic on a street I live on. And there's a basic approach of having a collector street where you want to move cars versus a local street that's still connected, but it might have a little bit of a jog here and there, might be narrower to discourage people from cutting through. So there's a variety of different levels that we could look at in Missoula. It's okay for a subdivision to have a single, you're going to get a chance to vote on these 4 options in the next question. So look at them and look at these little icons. The first option is, it's okay for a subdivision to have just one entry. Connections are required to streets on the perimeter of a subdivision. Subdivisions must have blocks, identifiable blocks in the interior. Streets should be connected similar to historic street patterns. Variety of reasons why people might pick each of those. We want to hear from you. Local street patterns, which approach do you favor? It's okay for a subdivision to have a single entry. You saw these before. Connections are required to other streets. On the perimeter, subdivisions must have interior blocks. Streets should be connected similar to a historic street pattern. Okay, we're at 87. I'm going to close the poll in a little bit. And by the way, we're about halfway through this presentation, so I appreciate you hanging in there with me. That's a joke, by the way. We're most of the way through it. Hang in there. I never met a slide I didn't like. Pictures of my babies in a few minutes. Okay, we're at 95. I'm going to get ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm closing the poll. Okay, so we see a strong majority here. It's certainly not unanimous, a pretty strong minority opinion here. Pedestrian and bicycling improvements. Your thoughts on this? Reduce bike and pedestrian efforts. We need more money for other programs. Option 2, leave the bike and pedestrian efforts at current levels. Increase funding for pedestrian and bike enhancements, even if there are less funds for other transportation improvements. Provide more bicycle and pedestrian facilities, even if it means less space for automobiles. This, as with all of them, there are no right answers. Okay, so we're at 91. Just a few more seconds. I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to get ready to close the poll. Okay, so this is what we're seeing. 54, about half of you. About the other half split here. Should transit be given signal priority on key transit routes? When it comes to a light, it's able to signal that light, I want you to change please, so that it can move through with fewer stops, fewer waiting times at signals. Transit, once again, public transportation, buses, bus rapid transit you could think about in the future. Any type of transit that mixes with other modes. Okay, we're at 97. I think that's about as many as we have in here. I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Closing it. Okay, yes, about 80%. That's certainly a strong majority there. Transportation. So we're going to wrap this up. Now, I'm going to ask you your overall opinion of these scenarios. Remember, these are concepts. We're not going to take whatever you say is the winner and that becomes the auto plan for the future. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But we did want to give you a chance to say, well, look, after considering everything we've talked about, I want to tell the folks at OPG what I support overall. I'll ask you about transportation, then land use, then your overall opinion. Which scenario do you most favor as you think about each scenario's transportation strategies? To about 92, so I'm going to close the poll in a few seconds. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to get ready to close the poll. Here I go. Closed. So are some of you going, darn, my vote wasn't the majority. Anyhow, it's always interesting to see how a vote comes out. Majority saying focus inward as the general concept for transportation they most support. Now thinking about the land use strategies that are tested in these concepts. Which scenario do you most favor as you think about each scenario's land use strategies? To elected officials for everything that is happening in Missoula. And I've just noted a few. The code rewrite, the downtown master plan, UFTA. I just like to say it like that. Urban Fringe Development Area Plan. UFDAP, not as good as UFTA. I think you'll all agree. The transportation plan will be based on this vision. Again, there's constraints that need to be applied to this. We're gonna rein these in a little bit to say, well, how much money do we actually have to spend? These scenarios, as you'll take a look at them over here, once again on the posters, you'll get a sense of these are spending a lot more money than we actually have. So the plan itself will be based on that, and it's also going to be based on an official 2035 forecast year. We frankly have no clue if and when 200,000 might be reached. Not an idea. That's not the point of the exercise. Envision Missoula next step. So you're going to get a chance to, you did that tonight, you're going to get a chance to see the vision scenario and the transportation planning principles, how were your values, your reactions to this whole process captured in late March, early April? Look for those. And then the transportation plan itself, the more specific execution of how do we progress out into the future will be based on that vision and those principles. And that's going to be released in about May. And we really want to hear what you think about all of this. So one thing for you to do is to make sure that we know how to get a hold of you if you want to learn about how these things are released over time. The second thing that I want to make sure you all have an opportunity is if you've been here, let's say you didn't have an opportunity especially to participate in the workshops before, you saw these ideas and you thought, well, there were other things I wish they had explored tonight. Please use this as an opportunity to say, well, this is what I think that you didn't explore, or this is another option that you could have explored tonight as you went through subject by subject. But I think, Mike Kress, that we're going to spend some time to just listen to other comments that you have now. So I'd love to invite Roger and Mike Chandler to come up as well if you'd like to, and listen to you. What are other things that you'd like to talk about tonight? We're going to do this for about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes, thoughts that you have tonight. Go ahead, ma'am.
The satellite town center scenario that you seem to reflect a real high use of transportation and cars. And I was wondering if you were assuming that the satellite town center people would be traveling to the city center rather than staying in the satellite town center to go to work. When in our small group, we did a lot of focusing the satellite town center to include employment opportunities for people there. And then maybe there would be some travel, but maybe even from the city center out to that satellite center to work on a public transportation system or something like that. So, and the way you had those blocks going way up there, I'm going, oh my God, we didn't think those people would be traveling that much, you know.
Right, I hope everybody got that. But briefly, what we did is we took the ideas that came out of the workshops and we captured them, and we didn't know how how the results would come out. We used a travel demand model, that's the official model for Missoula, for the transportation plan, to simply say, look, if we do this combination of improvements, if we do this combination of town centers, what might happen? And that's the results that came out of the transportation model that we didn't predict beforehand. One of the things to take into consideration, part of the reason why we showed those slides, is that those travel models may not capture everything that affects travel. If you remember those 5 Ds of density and diversity, those may not all be captured in the travel model, and they could impact travel.
Another thing to remember when you look at that travel is commuting with a car. Hopefully you're not reading, applying makeup, brushing your teeth, checking your iPod. If you're on transit, you have the opportunity to do that. So while you may spend more time traveling on a commute, you may be able to do business, relax, take a nap, whatever.
One other important thing about that particular scenario with the satellite town centers is that it is a conceptual scenario, and what we found when we sort of looked at that was that that one of the things that doesn't happen in that scenario is that scenario we really counted heavily on the idea that transit could carry all those trips. And so we didn't invest in the road improvements. We put the money on transit when we did that. And what we found was that the transit capacity that we thought we would be investing in there simply wasn't enough to offset that. So you have a lot of congested miles, but you're not spending as much money on roads. You have a similar level of congestion as what you have with business as usual, but you're also saving some money. But it is important to point out that, this is a very sketch level type of analysis. There are a lot of different ways to do transit-oriented development that are oriented towards specific trip purposes and specific development concepts, and obviously we haven't looked at any one in great detail. But generally what we found was that there is advantage to locating people close to activities. However, you have to get a lot of people really close together before you start seeing the benefits. And if you look at the comparison from the satellite centers to the focus inward downtown, you're seeing a lot more density and focus inward. And somewhere we reach that threshold between the satellite centers and the focus inward where you got that critical mass and you started to really see the VMT going down.
I'm going to just quickly, I know some of you need to run. Please, if you need to excuse yourself, not a problem at all. Please leave those keypad polling devices. It's really wonderful for you to not take those out the door. We would hate to have something happen to your limbs.
They blow up if you leave the building, right? Yeah.
Okay, yes, let's go here, and then we'll catch some others.
Something that's come up in the news just recently, but I know that it popped in and out in November that didn't seem to breach in this, especially when you're thinking of the real long range, is the bypass possibility from 93 on to Interstate 90. So at some future date when trucks don't have to go to Missoula or could go to Missoula in just a spot and not be caught up in our traffic, that they could bypass, and that if you're thinking way in the future, now's the time not to be buying cement, but be thinking of a route, thinking of scenarios so that when 2035 comes in place, that it can possibly happen. And, you know, I mean, Missoula, you'd think, is ahead of Kalispell, but I understand Kalispell's already working on a bypass, and we've got a lot more things in our way than I'd say little Kalispell does, but it's something that you ought to at least plug into the long-range future.
That's a really good point. The notion of a bypass came up at a number of the tables in November, and I think the business as usual scenario has the bypass on it. It's been modeled using the Department of Transportation's model for effectiveness, and it'll be a part of the discussion that we're going to be having with the community.
I guess you will analyze this. You asked several questions at the beginning about the attendance here. Just looking around the room, I personally feel that this group does not represent a fair consensus of the community, unfortunately. I know it should be, but I feel it's probably more loaded towards people who live in this close area, keen on bicycles, this sort of thing. So I would hope you'd be very careful to analyze that and be sure we're proceeding with data that is reflective of the community as a whole.
That is a very good point, and a point that's been raised in the past. One of the things we're doing as a part of this project is a public opinion poll. And the purpose of the public opinion poll is to normalize, if you will, what we're hearing tonight so that it's calibrated to what the community as a whole feels is going on. So we are doing that. The other thing we're doing is we're advertising extensively, and something that I'm cautioning elected officials on in this process is you guys showed up. You know, and you must be present to win. That's the way that's the way it works. And what really frustrates me is when we do a process like this, and you guys do the seat time, and negotiate and come up with compromises and get to a point, and then somebody comes in at the last minute who is invited to participate all along. They come in at the last minute and say, "Oh no, no, no! Now I want to start the negotiation from where everybody else got to." I don't think that's fair. So, you know, that said, I'm not the one that makes the decisions. I'm the one making the recommendations, and elected officials make the decisions. You guys are here, you're participating, we're doing a poll, a statistically valid survey of the community that will also inform this conversation, and everybody will have an opportunity to speak all the way through the process up to and when the elected officials make the final decision.
Thank you. I'm concerned that if we build, up here, thank you. I'm concerned that if we build heavily in the city center, we may lose our communities that feel like they do participate. And I therefore favored the satellite areas in order to give a sense of belonging to some areas that are outside the city center. If you build a real great city center, somebody's going to come right in from Arlie.
Thank you, good point.
Yeah, a two-part question. One is to encourage you to look at the existing centers that have been a part of industry and the redevelopment of those centers, especially in the case of the timber industry, where we've seen places like in your satellite examples of places like Bonner, that transportation to those centers and redevelopment of those centers are going to be critical, I believe, in your future. Next, I would focus on liabilities. And there's a major liability in irrigation systems that travel through the communities here. Each year, kids die on the irrigation lines. I think you could take down some of the fences that try to keep kids out of those irrigation lines and turn those irrigation areas into enclosed aqueducts and eventually into trail systems. So instead of a liability for the community, they become an asset, and that can be a part of your transportation plan.
Great, thank you very much. Good point.
Okay, we're going to go over here and then up to the third row.
I'd like just to make a comment about the possibilities for increasing innovation. I think there's a couple of extremely innovative strategies that haven't been addressed here, some of which are, say, decreasing road networks. Some increases in the bike systems. There's also like car share and other technological advances that I think we should be working into.
Thanks, good points.
Okay, here.
I just want to make an announcement. I'm here representing the Montana Association of Railroad Passengers. There's going to be a meeting on Friday, February 29th in Helena at the Chamber of Commerce. It's a pretty important meeting. John Tester recently put an amendment into Senate Bill 294 funding Amtrak for a feasibility study. And this meeting we're having on the 29th we're going to discuss that feasibility study. The University of Montana is doing one, Montana State, and also Department of DOT. So if anybody is interested and wants to come to that or just wants more information, there are these blue flyers right out here, right outside the door, or you can talk to my husband who's right here, who can tell you everything that you want to know. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the ad. Is there anybody in the, in fairness, anybody got a car to sell? Or, or a bike? Okay, go ahead.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay.
Thank you. I got here a little late, so I'm not sure this was covered in the first question. I didn't quite hear the question or the answer. My question had to do with the choice between in several of the choices that you had up there, between focusing inward and focusing on satellite development. It just seems to me that there are so many extraneous factors that enter into choices like that, it makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult for us to choose between them. But having said that, it also reminds me that the kinds of meeting that we're having here is probably taking place in other places in the country. These are general national problems and not just local. And in general, it seems to me that it's so difficult to consider how much influence a local community can have on problems that really have a national cause at the base.
And maybe I can just briefly respond to that. yes, there are a lot of factors out there that affect how people live and work and what type of development happens. But there is a relationship between how you spend your transportation dollars and what the decisions people make. People look for places that are highly accessible, and where and how you spend your transportation decides in many ways where that accessibility is and what type of accessibility it is. And there are land use strategies that communities can look at that make certain forms of housing harder or easier. And as you remember, one of the questions that talked about allowing this or allowing that relative to townhouses or what have you. In my experience, there are more communities that are actually holding back the housing market than there are those who are letting the housing market express itself freely. So that's part of the notion there, is in some ways you can think of guiding the market to places that make good sense for transportation efficiency. And you can also think about, well, what is the market telling us, and are we in the way, or are we trying to channel it in ways that are beneficial to all of us?
Yeah, and the gentleman, I don't think you were here at the beginning when Ted was talking about these alternatives being crash test dummies. We're not picking one of the three. We're testing all three to see what we like and what we don't like, and what we'll be picking will be some, best of all three combined with what we learned from the travel demand model, what we know about the fact, I think you weren't here at the beginning when I asked everybody who owned a car to raise their hand. We do have a lot of automobiles we have to move around, and the amount of money we have to invest. So we're not picking one of those, we're just learning from them.
The one thing before anybody goes home, just to make sure that is understood, is the way that this process works is we're really looking at what kind of future we're anticipating when we make decisions about how to invest in infrastructure. And there are a lot of pieces to the process, including the public survey that Roger had talked about. So I don't want anyone to leave here feeling like, oh gosh, I'm one of only 2% of people that voted for this. I guess nobody's going to do what I want. That's not the intent here. The intent here is rather just to kind of get a feel for who's participating in the process. But we're not going to, completely get rid of any of the ideas that anyone has come up with. But instead, we're going to try to improve them and make them better so that we can have infrastructure that is consistent with what people want.
Okay, we're going to go here, here, and then here. We're approaching the magic hour of 8 o'clock, which is the time we'll adjourn.
Your slide of the CO2 showed that A, B, and C, business as usual all the way up to the focus inward, had major increases in CO2. Is there a scenario D that, gets less CO2? I know that the EPA now is not required to measure that in their air quality analysis, but may in the future. Is there any thinking about how would we approach that?
Ted.
I don't have a magic answer to that. I think it's one of the great questions of our time. I think that part of it is that we've taken a look at some strategies that seem to have an impact on it, and maybe we could look at moving forward with some of those. I'd invite any other comments that any of you might have about that.
Yeah, my thought on that, Alex, I was back in DC at a conference that talked about this kind of stuff last week. My general sense is that we know what to do, we're just afraid to do it, or it's inconvenient to do it, or it hadn't gotten real yet. I trust that we as Americans will do the right thing, once we exhaust all the other options, as Churchill said.
Okay, now I think I promised you the next.
Yes, I just have a couple of things. I wanted to comment on your response to the woman who pointed out the meeting on Amtrak in Helena, and I want to just remind you that when we're looking at transportation, we can't just look inward at connectivity within Missoula, but we have to also look at transportation between Missoula and other places. And I think one of the things that should be considered, given that all that's going on, is if we would get Amtrak service restored, where would there be a terminal in Missoula, and how would that connect to the other public transportation, and how would there be parking for people to drive, who are going to drive and leave their car for an extended trip, or could they get to the train station without having to leave a car there, and so forth. That's really important. I know I used to live in Great Falls. They moved their bus terminal for the Mountain Line bus used to be downtown. At some point, they moved it out to the airport. And you think about the different clienteles that bus service is serving, and somehow there has to be a happy medium. And again, I unfortunately could not come to the earlier sessions, but I wanted to point out that every time you do a transportation corridor, you need to look at it two ways. It's a corridor for transportation on one hand. It can be a barrier for other kinds of transportation back and forth across that corridor on the other, and I know we're facing a lot of that with how to get people back and forth across the river and back and forth across railroad tracks and back and forth across Reserve Street. So that's the two flip sides to make sure we consider as we look at how we're going to move cars and everything else, trains, buses, and everything around. Just the thought process there.
Thanks, that's good points.
Okay, we have time for 3 more comments, and then we'll conclude the meeting. The Envision Missoula team will be staying after, and any other conversation, discussion can carry on after we adjourn at 8 o'clock. So 3 more. 1.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks for all the folks that made this seminar and meeting possible. It was a great session and get a lot of input. On that feasibility study, it's basically to do a study through the southern route from Billings through Missoula to Spokane. That's what the study's about. And also, there's been a lot of talk in the last few years about roundabouts in Missoula. And Bob Giornato, he's here tonight, and he's spent a lot of effort and time and spends a lot of his volunteer time to put things together. So that's a part of the picture that's really important to move traffic and keep the flow moving. So, thank you.
Okay, 2 more comments, questions?
Just a comment, not a question. I'm just so glad that we are making such an integral link between land use and transportation. That has not always been the case in traditional transportation planning, and kudos to you and us.
Kudos to you all. Thank you all for showing up. That's my concluding remark. I have 1 more.
Yeah, I like the roundabout idea. I think we waste a lot of CO2 by, for example, when I pull out onto Reserve, I've got to floor it just to get up to 45 miles an hour so I don't bum someone out who's coming up behind me, or 55 if that's how fast they're going, and then slam on my brakes as soon as I get up to speed to stop the stop sign. So I think until we address the issue of stopping and going so much, we're not going to solve the CO2 problem or the congestion problem. So I like roundabouts and other solutions.
Any concluding comments from any on the Envision Missoula team? Thanks to all of you for participating tonight, for being involved earlier. Please stay tuned, stay involved. This process is built on your feedback and your thoughts and ideas. And we hope we've been true to what you've said and what you've expressed. And we're going to try to continue to do that within the constraints that we have. Please give yourselves a hand. Thanks so much for being here.
Conversations about restoration. It wasn't an issue that a lot of us had addressed very much. A few of us were starting to, and